Did you know that the Great Flood story is incomplete? Once upon a time, you were told that the flood was sent to wipe away evil from the earth. But what if we told you that the flood wiped away something else? Something that wasn't evil but genius and more advanced than any earthly species could ever be? Yes, humans and animals were not the only ones destroyed in the flood. There is evidence that the catastrophe also extinguished a sinister advanced civilization. Who is this advanced civilization? Is there any evidence that they existed before the flood? And more importantly, did the floodwaters entirely abolish their remains? We will find out in this new episode of Secret Origins. Welcome. At first, the flood was just a Bible story, something read out of an ancient book to its believers. It read that there was a righteous man, a massive boat, and an entire planet swallowed by water. The Almighty sent this flood to flush out wickedness from the surface of the earth. It was too much, and there had to be an end. But what if there is more to this story? The Great Flood wasn't just a warning to the righteous. It was a record penned down through different cultures. But there is a scarier thought. The Great Flood did not just wipe out wickedness from Mother Earth. It erased an entire ancient civilization. What's more, this civilization may have possessed more knowledge, technology, and cities that surpassed the advancement in our world today. And for an icing on the cake, they left footprints that even the floodwaters could not wash away. Brace yourself as we uncover the evidence of the forgotten world that existed before the rain. But before we pick apart the traces of an intelligent civilization before the flood, let's talk about the flood itself. Do you think it really happened? You've heard the Bible tales. A man named Noah was singled out to preach to the sinners at the time about the impending disaster. His message was simple: repent and join the ark before the flood hits. But the herd of people did not listen to a word he said. And then it came. The flood waters. Gushing from the heavens for days on end, it poured endlessly. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain poured down on all who refused to get in the ark with Noah and his family. And for 150 days after the rain, the waters stayed on the earth before disappearing altogether. Then the new world began with Noah, his family, and every living species inside the ark. But unfortunately, this is where historians found a problem. It was a big problem. To them, the Noachian flood story did not add up. Questions kept rising to the surface concerning Noah's warning about the imminent catastrophe. How did he travel the entire world to warn people about the flood? In addition, how come not even one person budged? It made no sense. This led researchers to hint at an eerie conclusion. What if the flood never happened? Crazy, right? But before you let that thought sink in, there is something you should know. The Great Flood is not limited to a biblical tale. This is where it gets weird. You would expect one or two ancient cultures to have flood myths. That could make sense. After all, rivers do overflow, and storms visit us once in a while. But the tables are turned when a story that sounds like a folktale is spread across too many cultures. It begins to hold water. The same goes for the flood story. Since over 200 cultures across the planet all tell nearly identical flood stories, it is no longer a coincidence. It becomes a pattern. Take, for instance, the Mesopotamians. They had Utnapishtim, who was warned by the gods of an upcoming deluge. As a result, he built a giant boat that carried his family, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things. Or do we refer to the Hindus? They had Manu, who was saved by a fish god and carried aboard a ship to repopulate the earth. The list is endless. The Maya, the Greeks, the Norse, the Chinese, and even the Australians, you name it. They all have the story of a flood that came to cleanse the world after an age of corruption and forgotten power. Same plot, different names, and different timelines. If one myth is rooted in so many cultures, then truth lies within. Think about how specific the details are across different versions. 1. There is a warning from a god or celestial being. 2. There is a chosen survivor or family. 3. You see the building of a great vessel or ark. 4. Animals and knowledge are upheld and rescued for continuity's sake. And lastly, there is a new beginning afterward, a changed world from what existed before the flood. Even in cultures that had no contact or shared language, the same elements showed up time and again. Because of this, researchers James Fraser and Mircea Eliade argued that the flood myths are not just myths. Behind the folklore, there had to be something more. It has been established the flood was no scam, so what if they were not all making it up? That would mean one thing: the flood stories are eyewitness accounts handed down over millennia. And although many like to go with the Noachian version, where a new world began from only Noah and his offspring, it doesn't tick all the boxes. From here, the thought begins to rise. What if there was an ancient civilization that was wiped away by the flood? Furthermore, what if some survived to share the story of their former existence? Realistically, what if they left geological evidence too firm to ignore? The flood myth is no myth. Instead, it is a memory whose story has been told from culture to culture. In the same vein, the Earth has its own way of preserving memories, like the Great Deluge. If an advanced ancient civilization was indeed wiped away by the floodwaters, trust the Earth to keep the records. Whether through rocks, soil, or ancient seabeds, the planet keeps geological entries. If the Earth is so good at preserving geological evidence, why won't it keep some from a massive hydrological event like the Great Flood, an event so widespread that it reshaped continents for millennia to come? Surely something is lurking for us to see. But the question is, what are they? In the state of Washington, there is a place that looks like the aftermath of a planetary war. One look and you would see rivers that don't flow, valleys too deep for their streams, and ripples the size of high buildings, all etched into solid rocks. This place is called the Channeled Scablands. For decades, geologists racked their brains over one question: how did this bizarre terrain come to be? This query bugged minds for years, not until a man, J. Halen Bretz, proposed something radical. In the 1920s, Bretz suggested that the Scablands were carved by a massive flood. And Bretz did not suggest a random deluge, no. He proposed that the flood was so violent, it would have drowned entire regions in mere days. At the time, he was laughed at. It took 50 years, satellite imagery, and overwhelming evidence to prove he was right. But here's the question no one's asking. Were the Scablands carved by the same great flood we all know? More interestingly, what else did the flood destroy? Think about it. This wasn't slow erosion. This was a cataclysm. Imagine water moving at over 60 miles per hour, walls of it hundreds of feet high, capable of erasing entire cities and whatever secrets they held. Mainstream science calls it the Missoula floods, the result of glacial dam bursts during the last ice age. This happened around 14,000 years ago. But researchers like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson argue something deeper. They suggest that this event wasn't just natural, it was a global reset. If the Scablands are proof of sudden world-changing floods, what else is out there? Some historians believe this was just one piece of a domino effect, that similar megafloods carved the Black Sea Basin, submerged the Gulf of Cambay, and buried Atlantis-like cities beneath the ocean. And maybe, just maybe, the real reason the Scablands were ignored for decades wasn't geological pride. It was because the evidence pointed to a version of human history too dangerous to accept. The idea that we weren't the first advanced civilization. But firstly, what is the evidence that there was one before us? After the floodwaters receded, something strange happened. Humanity forgot, and a new world began. But some things are not so easily erased. Scattered across the globe are structures that defy conventional timelines. Megalithic monuments so advanced, they don't fit the civilizations they're credited to, and in some cases, they seem older than history itself. Let's take, for instance, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, carbon dated to around 11,600 years ago. That's 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids. But despite the massive time difference, it features precision-carved stone pillars weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in complex symbolic circles. This was no primitive farming community. It was a society of engineers, astronomers, and architects. Then there's Pumapunku in Bolivia. Massive stone blocks cut with machine-like accuracy, interlocking like Lego, but built by people who, according to mainstream history, didn't even have the wheel. And the mystery? Many of these sites show signs of sudden abandonment or catastrophic damage, and the prime suspect is the Great Flood. When you take a closer look, these anomalies are not isolated. Across South America, Egypt, and Southeast Asia, temples, pyramids, and fortresses lie partially buried under the earth. Not only are they buried under sedimented rock, but their lower layers are built with larger, tighter, and more advanced stonework. This does not match the techniques of the cultures that later repurposed them. In Egypt, the massive blocks of the Osirion look nothing like the more refined, newer dynastic structures. The same goes with the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek, where trilithon stones weighing over 800 tons sit beneath Roman additions. Did these sites begin with an older, more advanced culture, one wiped out by flood or disaster? Archaeologists try to explain this away as a mere coincidence or clever engineering with primitive tools. But when the oldest ruins are the most advanced, and they align with flood damage patterns, it raises questions. Could these be the ruins of a pre-flood civilization? One with technology we don't fully understand? A society with knowledge of astronomy, sound resonance, and megalithic transport? And if they weren't just building temples but infrastructure, what kind of world did the flood really destroy? This is where it gets interesting. In a bid to answer the question, theorists have cooked up endless possibilities of the ancient civilization that could have existed before the flood. First on the list is the Mu, the mother civilization thought to have existed before humans. To date, scientists and theorists wonder what ended the reign of such an advanced civilization. While some blamed it on a sudden disappearance, it still doesn't add up. How can a developed community be obliterated in one night without a trace? But the big question is, what if they were destroyed by the flood? In the 19th century, a strange idea fanned the papers. Of all the theories cooked up by researchers, this one hit the spot the most. And it all started with an archaeologist named Augustus Le Plongeon. This was a researcher who spent a bulk of his career studying Mayan ruins and establishing arguments about the ancient Yucatan and Egyptian civilizations. But after a while, Le Plongeon decided to play it big. He declared that there was a mother civilization, one that preceded even the Mayan civilization. But was there any proof of his claim? The answer is no. But the lack of proof was only for a short while. A British writer by the name James Churchward soon came along with solid evidence. During his time serving as a soldier in India, Churchward encountered a top-tier priest who showed him the unspeakable, tablets that were written by the Mu civilization themselves. Can you believe that? The information on these tablets cemented the idea that Mu was no fairy tale, but a vast continent that housed technology beyond that of humans. But beyond the description passed on by James Churchward, historians asked for more evidence. It made no sense to bank on a single testimony from a priest and an archaeologist. In response, other researchers began to connect the dots, and when they finally did, the results left them speechless. Enter the Moai statues of Easter Island. These are gigantic stone statues of human figures erected by the Rapa Nui people of Easter Island. But when you observe these statues, you realize one thing. They are not ordinary. They were built with such advanced techniques that still make modern engineers marvel at the precision. And to think that these were built millions of years ago. This brings up the floating question. What if the statues are a remainder from the aftermath of the drastic flood? To further cement this scary thought, the Rapa Nui people were interviewed regarding the excellence of the Moai statues. When they were asked about the origin of such superior engineering knowledge, they revealed that the Moai were built to honor their ancestors. In the words of the locals, the knowledge was passed on to them. But who are these ancestors? How was such knowledge passed through such wide time gaps? Did the flood truly wipe away everyone aside from Noah and his descendants? With further research, scientists began to debunk Churchward's evidence and his claims of the Mu civilization. Many cited the fact that an entire advanced civilization cannot be destroyed out of the blue. There should be substantial remains, both visibly and on Earth's surface. When they could not find substantial geological evidence of such an existence, the theory began to sink underground. However, we must remember, when there is smoke, a fire is burning somewhere. If the fire is not the Mu civilization, it could be something else. Even worse, what if the ancient civilization wiped out by the flood was not human-like at all? You know, when the topic of an ancient civilization comes up, many like to think up great pictures. Perhaps they were like humans, but in a different way. But is that really the case? What if the ancient civilization wiped out by the flood were entirely different from humans in every way? What if they were animals? Enter the dinosaurs, but not as you know them. For over a century, dinosaurs have been branded as huge, instinct-driven beasts. Massive, yes, but not intelligent, just evolutionary dead ends. But what if we've had it all wrong? In 2021, paleontologist Diego Pol led a study on the Maiasaura, a herbivorous dinosaur long dismissed as ordinary. What he found changed everything. These dinosaurs didn't just roam. They returned to the same nesting grounds annually. This instinctive behavior suggested memory, environmental awareness, and even strategic thinking. What's more, they lived in cooperative societies. The males guarded nests while the young foraged for food. They planned, they organized. It was obvious that these species weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And they weren't the only ones. Among the fossil record, another species stands out like a glitch in the simulation, the Troodon. They are small, fast, bird-like, and disturbingly clever. It had a brain-to-body ratio comparable to mammals, binocular vision, and grasping hands, traits that point to cooperative hunting, tool use, and problem-solving. Little wonder that paleontologist Dale Russell and other researchers began to propose a shocking idea. If not for the cataclysm that occurred millions of years ago, Troodon may have evolved into a humanoid, that is, a being capable of complex speech, culture, and technology. Sounds crazy, right? Maybe. But consider this. What really wiped them out? Mainstream science blames an asteroid for the extinction of dinosaurs. But what if the final blow wasn't from above, but from below? For a long time, massive floods have been triggered by melting glaciers, shifting tectonics, or even celestial interference, like in the biblical story. And each version of the flood story has rewritten Earth's surface multiple times. Could one such flood, like the ones described in ancient myths, have erased not just any random species, but the dinosaur civilization? If intelligent dinosaurs once walked the Earth, what if their cities are buried deep beneath rock, sea, and time? Even worse, what if the floodwaters wiped them away? One thing is true, when cities sink, they take their secrets with them. But thanks to modern sonar scans and underwater archaeology, Those secrets are starting to surface. In the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India, marine researchers discovered what appeared to be massive geometric structures, streets, foundations, and grid-like patterns, you name it. And these were found more than 100 feet beneath the water. Some estimates place them at 9,000 years old, centuries before the Indus Valley civilization even existed. On the other hand, there's Yonaguni, a massive rock off the coast of Japan. Beneath the waves lies a staircase-like formation, terraces, pillars, and flat surfaces cut at near-perfect right angles. Mainstream archaeologists call it natural, but divers, researchers, and even geologists like Dr. Masaki Kimura insist the lines are too precise to be accidental. And in Dwarka, India's legendary sunken city, archaeologists found walls and artifacts where mythology said Krishna once ruled, before the sea swallowed his kingdom. Think about it. Are these just freak geological events? Or are they submerged memories? It gets even more interesting. Most of these sites lie under thick layers of silt and debris. This means that they weren't just covered by rising tides. Rather, they were hit suddenly. If these cities were coastal, they may have fallen victim to glacial meltwater surges or even ancient tsunamis. These are known events capable of raising sea levels dramatically in a matter of days. According to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a comet fragment could have triggered sudden climate change around 12,800 years ago, melting ice sheets and flooding coastlines worldwide. So the flood is no longer a myth or some slow erosion. It's a planet-wide wipeout. What else is still out there, hidden in the deep? If the former pieces of evidence shook you, brace yourself for more. In recent times, satellite imaging has picked up strange formations off the coasts of Cuba, Bimini, and Egypt. Bear in mind that these are places legends already linked to lost cities like Atlantis or Heracleon. Most of them remain either unexplored, dismissed, or classified. But if the ruins under our oceans match the ruins on land, and if their age defies the accepted timeline, then we're not just talking about local disasters. We're talking about the destruction of an entire global network. Yes, these could be footprints of the Great Flood. But there is a slight problem. In the search for evidence of the destruction of advanced civilization, most researchers focus on more tangible proof, things they can see and feel. Since the human brain is wired to believe things that are more physically tangible, this has been the focus. However, there remains an untapped niche that could expose everything about the pre-flood civilization, their knowledge. It's one thing to find ruins. It's another to discover that the people who built them may have known more than we do. Ancient texts, forbidden tablets, and unexplained artifacts suggest that pre-flood civilizations weren't just piling stones. They were busy inventing so much more. For example, let's take the Sumerians, who were credited as the first civilization. Yet their earliest writings already include complex astronomical knowledge, advanced mathematics, and references to planets that we humans discovered millennia later. How did their first step look like our 50th? In Egypt, the Dendera lights carved into temple walls resemble vacuum tubes or arc lamps. At Tiahuanaco, Bolivia, the Gate of the Sun is covered in what some say is a solar calendar more accurate than ours, and the mysterious Antikythera mechanism found in a Greek shipwreck is a mechanical computer dated over 2,000 years ago. However, researchers believe it was based on much older designs, perhaps salvaged knowledge from a forgotten age. If you argue that this knowledge came from nothing, how was it possible? And if it came from something older, what was that something? What if post-flood civilizations weren't inventing new knowledge, but recovering pieces of a lost system? Many ancient cultures speak of being taught by sky beings, sages or survivors from an earlier world, survivors who remembered just enough to restart the cycle. If that's true, then the Great Flood didn't just destroy ancient cities. It destroyed entire paradigms of science, energy, and understanding. What's crazier, we've been trying to rebuild the puzzle ever since, without knowing what the original picture looked like. What do you think about this evidence of advanced civilization destruction? Tell us in the comments. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again,